Okay, so how was your first time with irigaray? Let's hear some of your comments. Anybody really love irigaray? Is there anybody who... Armatas? Okay, anybody like irigaray? Okay, Milulis, Korolashvili, can you tell us why? Let's start with Korolashvili. Go ahead. Okay, Milulis. Well, yes.
I'm going to say I liked her. I don't know if I loved her, but I liked her.
Okay, okay. Why did you like her?
I enjoyed the, I guess, her philosophy on caress. It seems like I needed a little bit more of knowledge. I've read some of these other philosophers, what they were saying. I mean, she does put a bit of it in there, what their point of view on caress was and how they defined it in comparison. I felt there was a lot of she was a little booberish.
Yes. There's a lot of connections with Buber. I'm glad you noticed. Good. Milulis finds her writing interesting. Korolashvili likes the other philosophers' perspectives. Okay, good. Anybody hated her that you need to get it out of your, off your chest before we start? Okay, Korolashvili. Okay, no, that's just you agreeing with the fact that she's kind of Buberian. Good. No haters for irigaray? Okay, good. Any questions before I start? Okay, good. All right, so let's begin. So in case you didn't notice, today we are going to talk about sex. Finally, in a class on love, there has to be a whole section dedicated to this, and we finally arrived. So, and you're very lucky to be in this class because from what I remember of sex education in 8th grade, we haven't been taught much in the education system, right? We have mostly the 8th grade sex education, and then we're on our own, right? And if you had the same type of 8th grade sex education I had, you didn't learn that much. Mostly, I would summarize my experience as follows. We were taught not to have sex, first of all, but if we did, this is all the big list of all the diseases that could happen to us, including pregnancy, right? So that's basically, in summary, how we were taught when I grew up, right? And I don't think things have progressed that much since, right? We have an education based on a lot of what is taught in sex education instills fear of what will happen if we have sex or unprotected sex, right? Most of the emphasis is on all the bad things that could happen. Rarely do we have a sex education class where we are taught how to have sex, how to have good sex, right? How to have pleasurable sex. This is not taught, right? We're mostly taught either to abstain, or if we don't abstain, to be extra careful because all these bad things could happen, right? So there is a huge gap. There is a huge, so much is missing, right, from that education. And we're not really taught to relate. We're not really taught to communicate sexually. We're not taught to have pleasurable sex, because this is something that needs to be taught. It's not obvious, right? In many treatises, sex is compared to playing a musical instrument. How many of you have been inflicted a musical instrument when you were growing up? Let's see. Just put in the chat if you have, and then you'll. Okay, Ben, yes. Okay, what did you guys play? Korolashvili also. Recorder. Okay. What else? What else did you guys play? The violin, yes, that was mine. Yes. Okay, good. Drum, triangle, piano. Okay, guitar. Some of you were lucky. Very good. Now, if you were like me, I played the violin. When you start out with a musical instrument, how does this sound? Great, wonderful. No. Okay, right? For several years, right? Until you get to know your instrument, right? You're not going to sound that great. For the violin, it takes about 4 years on the violin to have a good sound, right? You're going to be playing the notes, but it's not going to sound good, right? It takes 4 years to get to know your instrument, to get to know where to put the bow, where to put the fingers, what pressure to apply. In other words, it takes a long time to know your instrument and to be really able to play well. It's the same in a sexual relationship, right? It takes a while to get to know your partner, right? If your partner is your instrument, right? It takes a while to get to know what they need, what pleasures them, what works for them. And as you get to know these things, your sex life intensifies, right? But right away, well, some of us are lucky, right? If you play piano, right away it's going to sound good, or guitar, right? So sometimes, right? But still, there's always room for progress, always room for developing the art, right? So, and this is not something we're taught, right? Especially if you watch, for example, a Hollywood movie, right? There's always the steamy sex scene somewhere in the middle, right? Often between people who have never had sex before, right? They're strangers, and it's amazing, right? There's fireworks, and you're like, and so when you end up with your own partner, you're like, wait a second, why is not like this Hollywood movie? Right? Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because the Hollywood movie is complete fantasy, right? Doesn't exist, this kind of amazing sex on the first try, right? How can it, right? If you don't know your partner, if you haven't gotten to know your instrument, how can it be amazing, right, on the first try? It can be good on the first try, but it should be getting better and better and better with time, right, as you get to know your instrument. So we're not taught this in sex education, how to get to know our instrument. We're not taught what women want, what men want, and so forth. So today we are privileged. We're going to study a text which will cover specifically what women want. Okay, so sadly, today we're not going to cover what men want, but there will be some elements of it here too. But we're really going to enter into a woman's experience, into her desires. So if you're a woman, you will be able to resonate with her. You will be able to find words to express what you have felt, but been unable to express. And if you're a man, you're finally going to understand what women want. Okay, so let's get into the text. In the text, she's going to talk about 3 levels of the sexual encounter. There's the first, I'm going to call it the first, the second, and the third. And they're going to, the level will be from the lowest to the highest, right? She's going to start from very kind of simple way of having sex, not very sophisticated. And she's going to go from level to level until the third level, which we will call the caress. And there we're going to really learn, right, that the highest level of sexual encounter. So the outline of the class will be as follows. We'll have number 1, the first level, which will be, she'll base herself on the philosophy of Sartre. The second level will be based on the philosophy of Merleau-Ponty. You saw these were the guys that she was talking about in the text. And the third level, she will base it on Lévinas, right? So number 1, the Sartrean one, is kind of like level 1 of sexuality, right? So beginner level, right? This is where we all start out, by the way. None of us skip this. Number 2 would be level 2, right? This is intermediate. And finally, level 3, right? This is advanced, right? So she's not going to judge, right, any of these levels. She's going to describe them. We can all recognize ourselves at some level we have all gone through these levels or are still in one of these levels, right? So she's not judging them. She's just showing what is missing and why we would need to get on to the next level, right? That's what she's going to do. Remember, irigaray is philosophizing in a post-marriage world, right? She's post-institution. She's not there to give moral judgments about sex, she's there simply to help us evolve in our lovemaking, right? She's there to help us grow in the way that we encounter each other sexually. And so she has formulated these levels: beginner level, intermediate, advanced. Okay, so we're going to learn, see each level, why we need to move to the next level, right? What's missing in each level and why we need to get eventually to the third level. All right, are you ready? I hope so. Okay. Level 1, Sartre. Now, I want you to keep in mind the Buberian concepts because they are going to come up. We're going to start with the I, it. Then we will go to the I, and then we'll go to the I, you. She is really thinking along those lines. She doesn't quote explicitly Buber, but whoever caught the, whoever felt Buber throughout the writing, you were right. It's there, it's present. All right, so let's start with Sartre. Let me summarize before we read because it's a little complicated. Actually, no, let's read first and then I'll explain. All right, let's go to Sartre, which is on page 18. Tell me when you're there. Just say yes or say something in the chat. Page 18 on the top. Who's there? Okay, thank you, Correlation. All right, so she's going to talk about first level of sexuality, beginner level, where we all start out, right? So I'll begin reading and then I'll explain. If this is the case, how do I desire the other and enter into a carnal relationship with him? Now she begins to talk about Sartre. In Being and Nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre maintains that the only possible way is to enchant him. It is a matter of making his consciousness descend into his body, of paralyzing his liberty, and so forth. Next paragraph, thus I can possess the other, right? Which, and according to Sartre, the fulfillment of desire does not exist without such possession. Okay, so this is level 1. This is the pure instinct to possess the other and to get something from them, right? This is where we all begin, right? When you were, especially when we're younger, right? We look at whoever we are attracted to and we just want them, right? We just want them so they can satisfy us, right? And this is where we, and this is fine, right? This is the step 1, beginner sex. And most of us, right, we actually move forward and get what we want, right? Whether the other is, you know, fully consensual or not, right? So this is something that often sexuality becomes just an overwhelming need to fulfill something that we desire, right? It has to do with need, with fulfillment. We have to have it, right? And we will do anything to get it. And it doesn't matter anything else but getting what we were needing at that moment, right? So this, I mean, there are many variations of this, right? There are some more criminal variations of this, which we don't need to talk about in this class, right? Obviously, the highest extreme is rape, but there are other ways we do this more subtly. Anybody have any ideas want to share with us? If you don't, it's okay, I'll do it. I know people become mute in this lecture. But anybody have any idea of ways, more subtle ways in which we just, right, sexuality is reduced to just satisfying a need, nothing else?
In terms of having it being reduced, I think it's just a matter of the different sites of, you know, the whole sexual thing in the beginning, because since two people might have completely different views on it, if it gets too drawn out, they might just be hurrying to get it over with. Or likewise, if someone finishes first, they might, you know, say, oh, well, I already want to be done with this, and it leads to rushing the other person, or vice versa. They end up not liking it, and out of regard, trying to protect others' feelings, they just try to do like quick haste stuff, and it becomes just like, oh, getting this person off or getting myself off and then just being over with it. And it reduces the whole like intimate and like passion buildings part.
Okay, excellent, Ben. Remember to put your teddy bear where your picture is. I missed you.
1 second.
Very good. Okay, excellent, right? This is high school sex, okay? To be honest, right? This is when you're rushed, you want to get it over with, or you want to get rid of, you know, your status, and you just have to, you know, let's just do this. And then sometimes we do it and we do it too quickly and the other person is not satisfied, but so what? Or we do it and we never want to see them again, right? So this is really the beginnings, right? These are the beginnings of sexuality. The most experiences, right, that you will have or that you have had in high school, they are rushed, they are quickly, they are clumsy, the emotional component is not addressed, the emotional component is traumatized, right? And so and this is therefore, and really what you're thinking about mostly often is oneself, right? And either I have to get rid of, my virginity, or I want to get this person, right? It's often really the agenda of the self is in the center, right? The other is just a means. Let me tell you a funny story. I was talking to a friend of mine, a male friend of mine, and I was asking him, what is it with men that, they can be satisfied with a casual encounter? Like, how does that work? Explain to me the psychology, right? And he's like, okay, I'll explain to you. He said, you know how you get home at night and in the freezer, like in the refrigerator, there is like cold pizza, right? And at that moment, you're so hungry, you don't care if it's cold. You don't even need to warm it up. That's how it is. Right? So you don't even, you're so hungry, cold pizza will do the job, right? Doesn't need to be all nice in a restaurant. And, it got me wondering that moment, like, who I was with regards to that guy. Like, I was saying, my cold pizza too, like, is that what's going on, right? So this is the idea, right? This is the kind of the beginnings of sex, where really we are thinking mostly about self-satisfaction, right? And so irigaray is going to talk about this, right? She mentions in other passages, this is kind of more like fast food sex, right? You're hungry, you get a fix, and you move on. And she's going to say, right, again, no moral judgment. Simply, she's going to say there is so much that you are missing when you are still on that level. You want to grow out of it eventually. So she says this here in page 18, last paragraph. Everybody's there. The other is and remains. Tell me if you're there. Say yes. Yes, okay. Right, so she's going to say, here's what is missing from this approach, right? The other is and remains transcendent to me through a body, through intentions, through words. You who are not and will never be me or mine, right? And then the last sentence, she says, the will to possess you corresponds to a solitary and solipsistic dream, which forgets that your consciousness and mine do not obey the same necessities, right? So in other words, she's saying on that level of sexuality, we are still in the I-it level, right? I'm writing it down for you, right? I-it. In other words, the person is simply an object of satisfaction. And you can, by the way, do this mutually. You can become mutual objects of satisfaction, right? Whether it's mutual or not, still the I-it, right? We saw this with Kant. Even if you both consent to be an it to the other, you are still in the I-it level, right? If there is nothing more than self-satisfaction, right? So there are even relationships where both are in it for the self-satisfaction. They have like an agreement, right? So it has the beauty of consent, but we are still in the I-it relationship, right? So she's saying at that level, right, when the other is simply there to satisfy me and there's no concern beyond that, right, we are still in the I-it level. And in doing so, she says, we miss the whole dimension of the you, right? There is so much more that we could be experiencing, right, if we were to outgrow this approach, right? Okay, so that's the first level. And by the way, she doesn't mention this, but it is important to know that moving from one level to the next means a shift, right? This is not something that will just happen, right? This is something that one needs to shift oneself in order to move from one level to the other. So, okay, so that's the first level. Let's go to the second level, which isn't that much better, but slightly. This is Merleau-Ponty. This one I'm going to summarize because frankly, it's impossible to understand. In essence, Merleau-Ponty, I'm not even gonna read what he says because it's insanely complicated. I'm gonna summarize it. And then we'll just read irigaray. What Merleau-Ponty is saying, everybody gets what I mean by Merleau-Ponty? This is the name, right, of the other philosopher that she mentions. I'm typing it up for you and I'm pronouncing it in French. It's easier, right? So what this guy is saying is basically this. He's talking about a sexual encounter where you wake up and you realize that, yeah, you slept together, but you don't feel connected. The connection didn't take place, right? This happens a lot, right? Even in married couples, you have moments where you sleep together and then it's finished and then you feel empty or drained or depressed. This is why in France, a lot of us, we light a cigarette after this. to recover from the disappointment, right? So this is a very common occurrence, right? The kind of disappointment, we feel empty, like something didn't happen, like it wasn't nourishing, right? And Merleau-Ponty actually is quite fatalistic about it. He says, actually, well, this is actually, he says, the dynamic. This is normal, because in the lovemaking, we get so caught up with our own pleasure that we forget the other. And so he's actually saying that this feeling of disappointment is a natural consequence of the sexual act. This is normal, he says. This is how we always will feel, whether we like it or not, because the total fusion is impossible. Total peace and harmony with another human being is impossible. It's a kind of utopia we have, that, you know, we're going to have this bliss and it's going to be amazing. But Merleau-Ponty says this is an illusion. It will never be. One can never be completely satisfied by another person, right? We always end up, says Merleau-Ponty, alone at the end of the encounter. So irigaray is going to criticize him, right? She's going to disagree with him. But that's his perspective, right? He says we have to be realistic. The other person is not us. So there's always going to be some degree of dissatisfaction. Something will always be missing. It's part of the whole encounter. And especially, make sure you write this down, we end up feeling alone. Even in, you know, with the best person, we will still at times feel alone, and this is normal. This is part of what it means to be with another. Okay, so irigaray is going to criticize, but I'm going to go on a tangent right now to elaborate a little bit more of what he's saying, right? So he's in essence describing a phenomenon which is growing in our civilization, which is the high percentage of people turning to solitude, right? If I was reading an article in the New Yorker, I think recently, maybe a year ago, talking about how many people prefer to be by themselves, right? They've been heartbroken a couple times and then they kind of close the store, like, we're done here. And more people actually are having solitary sex lives. You don't need really the other anymore with all of what we have in terms of technology, right? So more and more people actually are turning to technology to fulfill themselves sexually instead of to a more complicated human being, right? And so this is really a phenomenon of our times. They were describing how the generation of millennials to which you're a part, in the article, they were saying they're having much less sex than their parents and their grandparents, right? There is a kind of distance being created. People are choosing to stay alone, or choosing to fulfill themselves, or choosing a solitary approach, right? So this is something happening more and more, and it's possible to have, in a way, a sex life without another person today, right? This is new. This has never been so possible than in our civilization, where technology is giving us a lot in terms of not needing another person, right? So there is a huge issue with that, and we'll see that with irigaray. But what we are forgetting, right, when we recoil on ourselves and in a way take care of ourselves sexually, right? This is what a lot of us have to do, because it's hard to find a mate, it's hard to find someone reliable, and so we end up having to take care of ourselves, right? And often, as we are recoiling on ourselves, we tend to forget, right, something extremely important, which is that our sexual energy is meant to be offered, right? Whatever sexuality we have been gifted with, it is always meant to be a gift to another person. That's what we're going to see with irigaray, right? We tend to forget, right, that the gift of sexuality we were not made sexual beings for ourselves, right? We were made sexual beings in order to connect, right? And this is something that in our civilization, we are slowly forgetting, right? We are so individualistic that even in the realm of sexuality, we want to be, what's the word? Self-made men or self-made women, right? We want to find ways of being autonomous in terms, but this is, right, this is missing the essence of sexuality, which is to bring us out of ourselves and to bring us towards another in order to connect with them, in order to gift them, right, with what we have with who we are, right? So this is something that irigaray is saying here, right? Let's get to the quote. So go to page 21. So we're skipping the long quote by Merleau-Ponty and we're going into her commentary. This is so 21, 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph. But the subject object. Are you there? Who's there? Okay, thank you. All right, so it's a little complicated, the first few sentences, but then we'll get to the part you need to underline, okay? So she's talking, this is irigaray talking about Merleau-Ponty, and she's saying, but the subject-object dichotomy also depends upon the manner in which sexuality itself is conceived. Maurice Merleau-Ponty considers sexuality as ambiguity and indeterminacy, which are related not only to the body, but to life in general. Okay, skip all that, going now to the right quote. As a result, here is the important part. Sexuality does not favor the emergence of intersubjectivity. So this is the key. What does irigaray mean by intersubjectivity? Does anybody know? What does that concept mean? First of all, what does inter mean? What does the preposition inter mean? No, it doesn't mean inner.
She's saying that it's what we experience happens between.
Very good. Inter means between subjects. And what she's saying here is what Merleau-Ponty is saying. His view of sexuality does not favor the emergence of intersubjectivity. In other words, sexuality is meant to be an intersubjective action, right? It's supposed to happen between people, not you and you, right? This is something that is meant to connect us. It's meant to draw us out of ourselves. It's meant to enable some kind of growth that we can't do on our own, right? All of you will discover or have discovered how much a sexual partner can help in your growth, right? In your emotional, spiritual, even physical growth, right? Happens at the contact of another, right? And so when we recoil on ourselves, right, in fear of being hurt or because we're cynical that there's no one out there, right, we are in a way missing the opportunity to truly blossom, right? We are missing the opportunity of the intersubjective, the opportunity of being drawn out of ourselves, of being able to expand and grow and enlarge our souls, enlarge our hearts, right? So, and especially, and this is the key, sometimes often we don't know this, how much healing we can bring the other through our sexual energy, right? And this is something which we're not taught in our civilization, right? In our civilization, sexual energy is just seen as, some fun times, right? Or something we need to get, out of our system. In ancient cultures, however, sexual energy was considered to be very precious because that energy was what could bring life into another person, right? In ancient cultures, such as the Hindu culture, sexual energy is considered to be life-giving, right? Whether it gives rise to a child or not, right? Whatever you are offering in the lovemaking to the other is life-giving to them. You are rejuvenating them, energizing them, breathing life into them, right? We are not aware of how powerful our sexual energy is to heal another person, right? And I think especially males are not aware of this, right? Especially in our culture where we are taught to despise a little bit male sexual energy. In these ancient cultures, there was an awareness that energy, when it was very pure, it could powerfully heal a woman, right? You have no idea, I think the males in the class have no idea how powerful their energy is, what is the powerful impact that energy can have on a woman's body and soul, if that energy has been kept pure, right? This is why in Hinduism, there is an emphasis to cultivate that energy. Right? There is a lot of practices that people do in the East, right? Whether it's China or India or Japan, right? Young men are taught from the beginning to master their energy, to cultivate their energy, to channel their energy, because the energy is considered, one, precious, and two, once it is very well mastered and refined, it can have powerful healing power over the woman that it comes in contact with, right? So this is really what irigaray is inviting us to do, Instead of recoiling on ourselves, right? She's inviting us to, rather than recoil, prepare, right? Refine, master, channel, and then offer, right? This is what we should be constantly thinking, instead of giving up, right, on sexuality because, well, you know, there's no one out there and everybody sucks and, you know, and so forth. We should be working on our own sexual energy, refining it, and then preparing to offer it, because there is huge power in that energy. There is huge healing power in that energy, right? So this is the other, right, step 2, level 2 of sexuality, which Buber would call what? Which relationship? I-it, I, or I-you? I'm ready to type. I'm waiting for someone to tell me.
I.
Yes, I, right? You're still with yourself, right? Instead of moving beyond yourself, which is the goal of sexuality, is supposed to bring you beyond yourself, right? Okay, so this is the pitfall, right? Again, no moral judgment, right? We are all stumbling along in the sexual journey, right? But this is, some of us get bogged down on this level, right? Some of us get bogged down on level 1, right? We never grow out of this idea of, you know, sex as being self-satisfaction, right? Some of us, however, get stuck on level 2, where we have become, we have recoiled on ourselves, and we are too hurt or too scared to really enter, right, the scene, the dating scene, or whatever, right? We don't want to offer anymore, right? So the invitation, what irigaray would say is, yes, take the time to heal, take the time to center yourself again, but the goal is to offer yourself. It's not to stay in this limbo state, right? Okay, so now we get finally to level 3, which is Levinas. And here we're going to be, she's going to be borrowing a concept from Levinas called the caress, right? So this is not a concept from irigaray. This is something that she read in Levinas, but she likes it so much that she's now using it, right, in her own work. So let me define a little bit what she means by the caress, and then we'll read the quote by Levinas. So in essence, the caress is a word she uses to talk about a kind of lovemaking, right? So let me write this down, right? The caress is, it's a way to make love, right? Which for her is the highest level, right? Because apparently there are different levels of making love, right? We saw there's the I-it level of making love, the I level, and now she wants to go into the I-you level of making love, right? When you get to that level, she suggests you don't even need the blessing of a priest anymore, because you are already on the highest level, right? You don't need to go through the patriarchal structures of refinement, because you have reached the highest level of refinement, right? So that's kind of her take. But let's go and see, what does it mean, this way of making love, which for her opens up the dimension of the I-you in the sexual relationship. So let's go see what Levinas has to tell us about the caress. So she's gonna quote him at length on page 24. Third paragraph, the caress consists in, who is there? Who's there? Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna read, and you're going to tell me what you think she's talking, or he is talking about. This is a quote from Levinas. The caress, he says, page 24. Page 24, third paragraph. So this is Levinas speaking, right? The caress, he says, consists in seizing upon nothing, in soliciting what ceaselessly escapes its form toward a future, never future enough, in soliciting what slips away as though it were not yet. It, and I wish to add, this is man's caress, it searches, it forages. It is not an intentionality of disclosure, but of search. Okay, what is he talking about? What he's talking about, a way of touching, right? What is this way of touching? How is it different from, for example, the I-it or the I? What do you think? Anybody was able to read between the lines what he's talking about? In the American language, we have a word for what he's talking about, starts with an F. It's not the word you're thinking of right now, it's another one. What is that word in the, very good, Koralashvili, right? Foreplay. Levinas is talking about foreplay. Okay, so what is the big deal about foreplay? And why is it so important? And first of all, what is it? right? So let's talk a little bit about that. Foreplay is what most people who are in a hurry skip. In the it level of sexuality, there's no foreplay. There is, let me just get what I need, and doesn't matter how you come out of this, but I'm gonna get what I need. Foreplay, however, is very different, right? Foreplay, first of all, is simply the time you take to express your love to another person with your touch. That's all it is, right? Foreplay, let me say it again, is the time you take of expressing your love through your touch to the other person. This can be done in millions of ways, right? You can kiss them, you can hold them, you can squeeze them, you can caress them, you can hug them, right? There are many, many ways that, and what Levinas is saying is that this is not foreplay. This is the main thing, right? Very often the way we call it foreplay, right? Is the thing before, the main course. What Levinas is saying, this is the most essential. This is what sex is. There's nothing else, right? Then the ability to express to the other through your touch, to express your love, right? And so foreplay really begins way before the bedroom, right? Foreplay begins how you talk to your partner. Foreplay begins with how committed you are to them. Foreplay begins with everything you have said to them in the last year, right? And then slowly it eases into the bedroom. It's the time you're taking, right? To warm the other person up to, and this is more, she's talking more about the man to the woman, right? Is the time the man takes to warm the woman up, to kiss her, to hold her, to really touch her in ways that slowly relax her, right? And eventually you get to the play part, right? Which the Americans call, right? The play part. Now, according to irigaray, this moment, right, where you're just hanging out, right, touching and snuggling and kissing, she's saying this is the most important moment, at least for the woman, right? For the man, it's after. What comes after is the most important, right? But for the woman, actually, very often, this is the most important part. If you skipped, and there are two reasons, right? I'm going to talk about two main reasons why this is the most important part for the woman. The first one is the argument from ethics, right? There's an ethical reason. And the second one is a pleasure reason. Okay, so I think this is something that I think men need to be reminded, because they're wired differently, right? Men are wired to get to the goal. And if they don't get to the goal, they feel bad, right? If they haven't allowed, right? If they haven't gotten an orgasm or made the woman orgasm, they feel like nothing has happened, right? But here we're learning something very different, very counterintuitive for the male. Is that actually none of that really matters. It does, but it's secondary, right? What really matters is what is happening before that, is the whole setting up, is the whole time you take to make love, right? In different ways, right? With that person. So there are two main reasons why for the woman this is fundamental. If you skip this or rush through it or do it in order to, right? Something's going to be missing, right? So let me say it again. Many of us, we either skip it, right? Or we rush through it because we want to get to the best part, or we kind of see it like a means to an end, right? This is okay. So you'll be there and you'll be like, okay, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? And so I said, that ruins everything if you start saying that, right? So the idea is that this is the most important, actually. This is the center of the experience. And the two reasons have to do with ethics and pleasure, which I'm going to talk about right now. So first, we have an ethical reason. It's very simple. And we see this in irigaray. If you skip the foreplay, inevitably, the woman is going to feel like an it, right? Even if it's in a marriage, by the way, right? Even if you're married and you love them and you've shown your commitment, if you skip the foreplay, the woman will come out of it feeling deep down in herself that she was used, right? That somehow she wasn't properly loved. She feels like she was just an object of satisfaction, right? So in order to have an IU relationship, in order for the woman to feel like she's in an IU relationship during the sexual encounter, the foreplay is fundamental. This is what will make the woman feel like she's not just an it, but also a you, right? It's very easy for us to feel used. We're very sensitive, right? But the moment the man takes the time to do this, not in order to get to the next level, right? But for the sake of it, for the pleasure of it, for the love of it, because he wants to do this, because this is this is the most important part, right? Then the woman will feel actually like a you and not like an it. So this is the first main reason, right, why foreplay is so fundamental, is because this is the difference for the woman between feeling like an it and feeling like a you, right? This is the way that you can infuse ethics into your sex life, right? In other words, yeah, that's the best way to put it. The foreplay is the way that we infuse ethics into the sex life. So no matter how out of the ordinary your sex life is, or immoral according to some societies, right? This is how you can give it back its moral quality, right? Now, there's a second argument which has to do with the pleasure of the woman, right? And this is something often that is also misunderstood, right? For the woman to really open up, right, to the man, she needs this, right? And some women need longer than others. Some women, it's right away, they're ready. Other women, they take like 40, 45 minutes, right, to get warmed up. And you have to know, right, that there are different kinds of women, so that you learn your instrument, right? Learn your partner. And some women really need that time in order to physically be able to open up to a man and not feel pain, right, during intercourse. Now, there are many, many of us who will or have or are, right, experiencing pain in intercourse. And some of you might have partners like that. And the temptation is to think, well, maybe we're not compatible, maybe we're not physically compatible, you know, what's going on, why is she feeling pain? One of the main reasons is that she hasn't been properly opened, right? There has to be, with that type of woman, a lot more time taken for foreplay, and sometimes not even just physical foreplay, emotional foreplay, right? Helping her feel safe and loved and secure, all play a role in how much she's able to open up. We'll talk about that in a second, about the emotional component. But many women who suffer pain during intercourse, the reason is that they don't feel safe enough to open up. That's really the reason. It's not that you're the wrong person. Is that somehow that woman has been taught not to open up, right? And so she needs to feel extra safe, both emotionally and physically. And the foreplay then has to encompass not just physical caresses, but also emotional, what's the word? Emotional, making the person feel safe emotionally too, right? And it can take a lot of time because there's a trauma associated with the pain, right? So this is one thing that we need to remember, right? That the woman, the more you prepare her, right? The more you take the time to make love to her without thinking of the goal. This is fundamental. This is not a means to an end. This is it, right? If the more you take to do that, the more the woman opens up and the more pleasure she will feel, and consequently, the more pleasure you will feel, right, as a man. So these are the two main reasons, right? Why is so this caress, right? This time taken to make love to the person without thinking of what is next, without thinking of, you know, the orgasm and so forth. You're just thinking of them. So many times you're having sex with someone and the goal is the orgasm and they're just thinking about that and we're just going there, and you miss the love making, right? You miss the love. You miss all of the things you can do to express love to that person, to the point where the rest doesn't matter anymore. At least for a woman, it's easier to do without if we have the whole foreplay going, right? Having said that, the whole foreplay will give you more chances of having eventually that orgasm that the man wants to give you. Okay, so let's look a little bit at some quotes that go in this direction. Go to page 25. Go to the 1, 2, 3, third paragraph. Here you have a very Buberian quote. Just one line: the caress is an awakening to you, to me, to us, right? This is a way to awaken the I-you relationship, right? That's just to go along with what I was saying. And then you have, yes, last paragraph. The caress is an awakening to intersubjectivity. In other words, it is to the degree that you love in that way that you will form a bond. In other words, that you will escape the pitfalls of level 2, where you finish the sex and you feel disappointed, right? And you want to smoke that cigarette or eat a cookie, right? To get over the disappointment, right? What she's saying is that if you really cultivate that aspect of your relationship, when the deed is done, you are not going to feel empty. You're going to feel nourished. You're going to feel fulfilled. You will have had, right? And it's in a way, so the connection will have taken place. You won't awaken feeling disconnected, right? It's a touching between us, which is neither passive nor active. Here she's saying that there are no roles. It's not just the male doing everything and the female doing nothing. Both are involved in the caress, right? There are many things a woman can do to a man, and there are many things a man can do to a woman before any type of penetration or orgasm, right? It is an awakening of gestures, of perceptions. This does not mean that they're ambiguous, but rather, and this is important, they are attentive to the person who touches and to the one who is touched. The caress is attentiveness. You are attentive to what they desire. You are attentive to them, right? The more you think about how can I please them, how can I make them feel loved through my touch, the more you're being attentive, and the more you are in an IU relationship, the more you are crafting an IU relationship in your lovemaking. And this is an art, right? It's not easy to maintain the IU in the lovemaking. Very quickly, often we fall back in level 2 or level 1, right? Okay, now there's an important quote, which I want to really take time to comment on page 26, second paragraph. The caress is a gesture word. Okay, let me write this concept down. Gesture word. Okay, she invented a word there. What does it mean, a gesture word? First of all, what's a gesture? What does it mean, a gesture? Need definition. Nobody knows? An action. Okay, very good, Acevedo, right? Gesture is an action. Now, what does it mean that an action is also a word? What does that mean? What's a word for? What is language for? What's the goal of speaking words? Why do we speak?
To communicate.
Good. To communicate what?
Either how we feel, what we want to do, and just getting your point across.
Okay, very good, right? A word is there to communicate what is inside of you. A gesture word is a touch which communicates what is inside of you. Okay, let me say that again. A gesture word is a way of touching which communicates a feeling. Now, if you don't have any feelings for that person, what are you going to communicate? Nothing. So irigaray is saying, when we get ready to make love to another human being, let us make sure that we actually have something to communicate to them. And if we don't, maybe it's not the right thing to do, right? Because you have nothing to say, right? So in other words, what she's saying here is one of the most crucial components of lovemaking or of good sex or the high level sex is the emotional maturity, right? How deep is your love for that person, right? How deep is your love for that person? Because sexuality, we forget, is a language. Everything we're doing when we're making love to another person is speaking. We are expressing something to them. What are we expressing? Love, right? Most of us, we go through the motions like actors. Right, not most of us. Why am I saying that? Some of us, right? Go through the motions like actors. We have forgotten that it's a language. We are speaking, but the words mean nothing anymore, right? And so irigaray is saying one of the most important components of the third level of lovemaking, of an IU level of lovemaking, is that your touch corresponds or communicates or expresses a feeling which you have, right? So if you don't have any feelings, wait, right, before you express emptily, right? You want to wait. So this is so important because what we're realizing here is that good sex, right? If you want to get to a high level of lovemaking, you cannot bypass a certain emotional maturity, right? There has to be emotional growth between the couple before you can have a fulfilled sex life, right? Or before you can have a high level sex life. Rachel, is that a question? No. Okay, so that's the thing here that now I want to go and give you an example of this, right? Do you remember in the Song of Songs? This is a long time ago, but do you remember the Song of Songs, first of all? First text we did. So do you remember the moment he comes into her garden? We didn't study that specifically, but there's a moment where he comes into her garden and he eats the fruits and she invites him in, right? Which is clearly the moment where they consume the relationship. Now, does anybody remember what he calls her before entering the garden? Now in the text, it's interesting. He calls her this 7 times. There is like a crescendo. He calls her this first time, second time, third time, up to 7 times, and then he enters the garden. Anybody know what is the name he gives her before he enters her garden? If you remember.
Sister?
There's sister and the other one. Not enough sister.
Lily?
Nope. It starts with a B. Not beloved, no. B-R. B-R-I.
Bride?
Yes, right? 7 times. Now, they never get married in the text, right? But clearly the intentions are, right? My sister, my bride, my sister, my bride, my sister, my bride, 7 times, right? This shows how deeply emotionally involved the man is before he enters the garden. And that is when the experience is really next level, right? If you want next level experience sexually, you cannot bypass the emotional component. You have to begin to nurture that, to cultivate that in your relationships if you want to get to level 3. Right? And so this is so important, right? Now, this is very important to know this, right? That sexuality is enhanced by the emotional component. And this is so important, actually, that it can help us actually overcome a certain myth that is floating around. I'm sure you've heard this, that, you know, before we commit to someone, we need to make sure we are sexually compatible. So we first sleep with them before we decide we're going to commit to them, right? And sometimes we tell the person, like, you know, I don't know yet if I want to be with you, but, you know, let's sleep together, and then, you know, we'll see how we feel, and then I can decide if I want to commit to you. Now, based on what I just told you, why will that each time backfire? How will that not work? Anybody know?
Because you're sort of like rushing to the end of it instead of starting at the beginning. And the problem is that, you know, maybe the 2 people could possibly work, but because you're trying to get to the end of it already, you know, to that point of like, oh, let's have sex and see where we stand. It's like rushing to a part of a level you haven't completed or prepared for. So the way of doing these things is to start at the beginning where like you're both in the same like levels and you could actually build up to that point.
Okay, very good, right? First of all, and also Koralashvili is saying they don't really know the person, right? So what's gonna come out of this, right? You're not ready, it's not the right time, but especially what Rivera is saying, right? Exactly, because it had to be a woman to, to clarify this for us, right? Absolutely. Because there is no deep emotional connection, the sex is not gonna be that great. It's not going to be really, in other words, the woman will not be everything she could be with you if there was the commitment. She's only going to bring a limited version of herself or a stunted version of herself, right? In other words, if you really want to know if you're compatible, you can't. In other words, you can't test drive a person. Right? You can't be like, let's try this and see how, simply because that person, at least in the case of the woman, most of the time, the woman cannot be fully herself sexually with you unless there is a commitment. So if she consents to, you know, try things out before the commitment, she's not going to be who she could be, right? She's going to do her best. She's going to try. But there is so much more that she could give you in the context of commitment. And so you cannot know how the person is really going to be sexually outside of a committed relationship, because it is only within a committed relationship that a woman fully blossoms sexually. Let me say that again, because that's important to remember. It is only within a committed relationship that a woman can fully blossom sexually. If you're doing it outside of that, the woman is there, she's improvising, she's going with the flow, but she's not everything she could be. So you do not know really who she could be. You cannot know. And so what I tell students, who ask me, well, then how do we know? We have to know whether we're compatible before, how do we know? There's two ways. Number one, do you have chemistry? That's enough. If you have chemistry and if you have common values, you're ready. It's going to be okay. The rest, you have to work it out, right? In other words, this is how we can know, right? We don't have to actually do the whole thing to know whether we're compatible. You can sense in the conversation if you're compatible. You can sense in the chemistry if you're compatible. And you know whether you share similar values, which are not going to ruin everything when you start to grow closer. Once you have the chemistry and the good conversation, anything can be worked out, right? There is nothing that you can't. There is no, I really believe there is no incompatibility that is, right? Once you have the chemistry, you can always work out whatever problems arise, right? In terms of incompatibility. Okay, so to conclude, I will compare sex here to cooking, which is a very French thing to do. So before I became a vegan, actually I was a vegan, but I went to Argentina and I told myself, I can't be here without tasting the steak, right, of Argentina. And let me tell you, it was an experience. It was like eating a vegetable. It was so light. It was like I was hearing a choir of angels as I was eating the steak. It was amazing, right? Now, here when I eat steak in this country, I don't have that experience. Can anyone tell me what is the difference between my experience in Argentina and my experience here in an American steakhouse? I mean, steak, you just cut the meat and put it on the grill. There's nothing difficult about it. What's the difference? Why I hate steak here in America? Who can tell me? What is the difference between Argentinian steak and American steak? They're cooked the same on a grill.
Hey, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, it's your expectations. So when you went to Argentina, you had this high expectation thinking it would taste amazing. And so your mind, went under the assumption, okay, what's it gonna taste like this? Versus when you're in like America, you're used to being over here. And in a sense, you've made it commonplace. So when you taste a steak here, your mind's always like comparing, oh, this exotic country, I only went to a few times or once, versus this area I've always been. So that's the reason why.
Okay, so you could say that, although to be honest, I really felt there was a difference. I wasn't imagining. Let's look at some other, they take the time to prepare it. The animals, okay, Shibilia, you're on the right track. What is it with the animals? Yes, in Europe too is the same. Exactly. When I eat steak in France, another experience too. The difference, Ben, you have to taste Argentinian steak before you say ever anything again. You will know that it is not just the expectations, right? Rivera is just made for food, and Argentina is made to, okay, so you guys, the main difference in my view is the quality of the meat, right? This is what Shibilia was saying. The animals are fed differently. They are not injected with hormones. It's more natural, right? So the quality of the meat is different. They're cooked the same, but the quality of the meat is what makes the difference. So parallel with sexual relationship, it's the same thing. It's what makes the difference between good sex and primitive sex, right? It's not so much what you're doing, is the quality of the relationship. This is what is going to make the difference, right? And so it has nothing to do with what your body looks like. It has nothing to do with your level of experience. It has nothing to do with how wealthy you are, or how competitive or successful you are, or how beautiful you are, right? It really has to do with what is the quality of the relationship? How emotionally close are you? At that moment, your body can look like whatever. You can have no job, right? And still have a beautiful sexual relationship, because what matters is the emotional quality. And so I've said this before, right? The difference, right, is really there. And so when you start having problems on the sexual level, right? Many couples, I think I mentioned this before, right? When things become stale or boring, right? You don't have to look at the sex. You don't have to start working out or, you know, buying sex toys. You can just look, how is the emotional going between us? How is your heart? How is my heart? What have we not said to each other? What am I keeping from you? What do I feel unable of sharing with you? Where has the door begun to close here in my heart? This is where you look if you want to revitalize your sex life. You don't look to, you know, buying a new lingerie, right? It can help, it's okay. But really what you want to look at is your heart. When is the last time I was able to tell you everything? What doors within me are locked to you, right? To the degree that your heart is closed, right? Your sex life will suffer. And so often when the sex life starts to degenerate and become, you know, boring, it's not really that there is no chemistry. It's not that we're not meant for each other. It's that something has begun to close in the heart. And that's the first place you should look at. Where am I? What am I hiding from you? What do I feel I can't tell you, right? And the moment you start to express these things, right? The moment you start to open up again to your beloved and be truthful and be like, I need this and I'm suffering here and I'm angry here. And this is what will revitalize your sex life. It's really, sexuality is the language of the heart. It starts with the heart and it ends with the heart and it continues with the heart. In America, we have distinguished the two. Right? We need to start connecting the two again and realize that our sex life is dependent on our emotional life. If you want to have a great sex life, you have to begin to cultivate the emotional component and begin to create intimacy between you and your partner, meaning I'm going to open up about things that I've never told anyone. I'm going to open up about my anger, my pain. I'm going to tell you what is going wrong in this relationship. I'm going to, right? We're going to talk about this, right? Freely. As your hearts begin to flow again, your sex life will begin to flow again also, right? So this is always go back to the heart. Like Buber was saying, to renew marriage, you go back to the IU. Am I still a you? Are you still a you? Right? At that moment, that is what you work on, right? The highest level of sexuality is one that is bounded, I can't find the word, is one that is connected to the heart, right? We have to begin to learn to connect the two, because sexuality is nothing more than the expression of love, right? And we've forgotten that, I think. Okay, any questions? This is your moment. I can stay now. Some of you can go if you have to, but if you want to stay, this is the moment to address any important questions you have about sex. This is your opportunity. Any questions right now that anybody want to speak about in front of everyone? Silence.
Is the next class we're gonna go over like the way to like please a guy then?
No. Sadly, she doesn't talk about that. I know it's missing. The next class is gonna be about silence. Maybe that's a way to please a guy. Yes, no, sadly, she doesn't talk about that. And it's interesting. I would love to see more personally, right? More literature about what men need. We don't know. We think you're savages, right? There is very little because, yeah, women are starting to write about it, but men have not yet written about what they truly need, right? I mean, we know what the men need sexually, but it's what do they need emotionally, right? That's what we want to know also, right? So maybe Ben, you'll be the one who writes that chapter, because I haven't found anything at this yet, unless you find something that you think I should teach. Yeah. By the way, yeah, I'm interested. If any of you men in the class know of the equivalent text for men, let me know so I can begin to teach it. I haven't found it, but if any of you know, I would love to hear about it. Yeah. Any other questions? I think I saw a little question. Okay, so Russell, come after class, wait after class and I'll tell you for your question. Okay, any other questions before before we move to more?
Yeah, I have one more.
Okay,
So how would you be able to like balance the like the IU in terms like the section? Because we talked about prior to it, oh, you know, be able to realize that and be able to have that balance to like, you know, foreplay before the actual like deed and stuff. So how's it like able, like even during the foreplay, to be able to, you know, balance out like, oh, I'm not just doing this for you, and you know, being also able to receive that back, and sort of making it, you know, like we said, to have it in the way of making each other like happy and ready and stuff like that, but also having it in a way that it's not just doing it for this sole purpose, you know?
Yep, yep.
More
This
like
is
doing
hard.
it on instinct.
It's hard to kind of focus just on the person, right? This is something that you almost have to practice. And sometimes some people say, I think in tantra sexuality, this is the sacred sexual teachings of Hinduism, they say even learn to make love without the orgasm, see what happens, and just to practice that, right? And then have moments where you finish. So there are many ways you can practice this, but eventually, of course, you want to kind of, yeah, you want it to kind of naturally flow from one to the other, but sometimes you have to maybe practice having sex without the orgasm, see how it goes, just so you can then begin to learn that, to have this kind of mindset where you're not thinking of the goal. So it takes practice. It takes practice, I think, to begin to turn away from one's pleasure towards the other's pleasure is not easy. It's a shift. It's a profound shift from the I-it to the IU, right? So you can have also things where you take turns. So one night is the woman's night, so you do everything for her. The other night is the guy's night, so then she does everything for you. You might have to separate the two because, you know, it's hard to be pleased and pleased at the same time in the same night, you know? So you could do that. You could have ladies' night, guys' night. There are many. You have to be creative. There's this weird, we don't spend enough time thinking about these things, I think. We really don't. There is a whole level of thinking we have to do in order to develop a good sex life. I was reading a quote today that said it's easier to command an army than to make love properly. That's a man saying this, right? It's easier to command an army than to make love properly. It's an art, right? It's something that you have to learn and develop, and you have to take the time to explore in order to become good at it, right? So does that answer your question a little, Ben?
Yeah. But I also have like one more question.
Sure.
So in terms of because I know you said as long as like the chemistry is there, everything is able to be worked out. So what happens like in terms of like in the bed and the two people, I don't know the best way to word it, but like what happens like if both of their like alignments in either what to do first or the way to proceed in either doing one day or the other, like how's that line up and how's that like task with, or how should I be handled? Because I feel as though doing either one first is like choosing the other person, making the other person feel like the it. And I understand, like, you know, you said like the separate nights and stuff like that. But I'm asking like what happens like when it's like both people trying to, you know, do it for each other themselves and they just have like two completely different ways on how to approach it. Like what's the in the middle way of approaching it for both of them?
So you're hitting on the important thing, that it's a language we have to learn to speak with each other, right? So in other words, I have to learn your language as a woman. You would have to learn my language as a woman. And but what I think irigaray is saying is that, yeah, I'm hesitating because she does seem to imply that the woman needs to be awakened first, but the opposite can happen also, right? We saw in the Song of Songs that the woman is the one awakening the man, right? So I think it's, to be honest, it's like a dance that you have to learn in time, right? When you first begin dancing with someone, you're always stepping on their toes and you don't know what they're doing. And in time, you start to learn. But so there's two things implied in a dance: that you know your part, right? And that you know your partner. And these are things you can already do by yourself. You can get to know your own sexuality. You can explore, you can read about it, you can learn. And once you're with a partner, you have to begin to learn from them, right? So, and tell them what you need. Two things, right? What do you need? And here's what I need, right? You have to learn to express those things. And slowly you will, in time, this is not something I can teach you myself since I'm not your partner, right? Your partner is your best guide, right? So you would want to tell them what you need, what do they need, and slowly you become good at this dance, right? But in the beginning, it's always a bit like, we're not aligned. We have the chemistry, but it's like, no, it's not how it should be. That's time. That's like playing the instrument. Am I helping you at all, Ben? I feel like I'm not.
Yeah, but I mean, like, when the conversation is already there, but I mean, like, when to make that choice on what to do first.
Like, what do you mean what to do first?
So, like, I just don't have a good example first at all. But, like, I'm gonna use, like, a completely different example. Like, let's say if two people on the road and one's like, okay, they want to go to this shop, and the other person say they want to go to this other shop, right? Like, both
When they have conflicting desires.
Yeah, so like
Okay.
would be like the middle ground for them.
Yeah, that's hard because sometimes, yeah, you'll have conflicting desires. You'll want to do something and your partner is like, oh, hell no. And vice versa, right? You have to ask yourself, I think, where the request that is made of you, does it touch your integrity or is it just a question of being flexible, right? There are some requests which will make you feel like it's touching your dignity. So Kant would be a good teacher there. He would say, be flexible, do whatever, as long as you feel like you keep your self-respect, right? If you feel like your self-respect is being threatened, you have, and in a way then the partner has to respect that, right? So there are limits to a certain degree with how much you can do or get from the person because of that limit of self-respect. Now, often it's just a question of preference, like, oh, I just don't like that. But it's not an issue of dignity. At that moment, you should be able to negotiate, right? You should be able to negotiate. It's a negotiation. It does take some negotiating at times with your partner to do some things you don't. The partner is like, what? What do you want to do? Does that help a bit?
Yeah, but I mean, sorry, it's just a lot of I mean, like both people are like okay with doing both of them, but I'm saying like what goes first if both of them have like just a bit stronger preference to another thing other than the other person. And it's a matter of like, like is it, whoever decides, okay, I'll sacrifice this for you and then we do this after? Or is it a matter of like finding something in the middle? And even then, like, isn't it gonna regardless feel like, feeling like the it? Or is the it more of like a feeling to how you feel to yourself when you choose that? And is it possible of like,
okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So, I mean, yes, you can be used by someone, but you can also offer, right, to someone. So it depends how you are. So for example, if you tell yourself, I'm going to put her first, let's imagine, or I'm going to put him first, right? The idea is this, that as you are doing that, you're doing it as an act of love. And so at that moment, you're not an it because you are doing it as an act of love. You are a you, right? Because remember, in the I-you relationship, remember what Buber said, as I treat you as a you, I become a you, right? So so when you're the one offering this, you're never an it, right? The it's taken from you, right? But if you're offering it, if you're telling the person, I'm going to treat you like this so that you can be a you, at that moment, as you're treating them as a you, you're becoming a you, right? Remember the long quote and the convoluted quote in Buber, I become you if you're something like that. I am an I through a you. You remember this, right? Yeah. So giving is never an it action, right? It is passive. The it's taken from you, right? So at that moment, doesn't matter who comes first, who comes last. If you're in an attitude of giving, you're always a you, right? Does that work?
Yeah. Can I just email you like the rest of the questions?
Let me stop the recording and you can